Hello, I'm Professor Matthew Rotella, and in this tutorial I wanted to go over UV unwrapping a model. To do so, I figured I would UV unwrap a model. In this segment I'm looking to go over just doing the body for now, but I plan on doing the other pieces as well. And it's going to be kind of just free form. I'm going to just do it, and whatever kind of comes out along the way, comes out along the way. I mean, I ought to be using a variety of tools to do this, so you should get a pretty decent idea of some things that can help you accomplish things. Anyway, you can see I have some edges placed in here that I don't necessarily need, notably this edge going around on the top and bottom. Sometimes it's good to have some geo that can help you make some selections for places where you may want to put seams. So like those edges match these edges, where like the top piece of wood, which is a different color of wood from the side of the guitar, can be placed, and that way I can have things either wrap around to the side, or I can more easily just isolate this strip as its own shell when I go to paint and color things, because seams are going to be generally the ugly part of when you're texturing, because the more seams you have, the more breaks in your texture, and therefore breaks in believability that you're going to have. So what you always want to do is you want to try to have as few cuts and seams when you're making your UV shells as possible, or you want to hide them in strategic locations. And also, as you start chopping up your UVs into shells, you ought to have a little bit of an easier time making selections of certain parts of your model. Anyway, I'm going to start by UVing this strip of faces going around the side, and these strips are going around in what is essentially a deformed cylinder. And so I'm going to open up my UV editor so you can see what's going on. Got my UV tools. I made this starting with a cube, so I have the default cube layout with my edge loops inserted into it. And so yeah, I'm going to use cylindrical unwrapping. So go under UV and I'll hit cylindrical, and that will give me this shape. And then also, so you can get sort of an idea of what's going on, is I'm going to put a utility texture on my model of a checkerboard. So I'll just make a Lambert since it's just a utility, and go into my color, file, and you don't have to use the built-in, or no, not file, pardon me. You don't have to use the built-in Maya checkerboard, which is right here, checker. You can get your own UV test texture offline and use that as well. Assign material to selection, turn on my hardware texturing, which there's a shortcut to right here, and then I can see what's going on there distortion wise. You want to limit distortion as much as possible. So ideally what you want to be able to get is nice, smooth, even squares going around here. Like all of this irregularity where it's like stretched and then it's short and then stretched again is no good. And equally you want these spacings vertically to, like you want everything nice and squared up. The point being, and your UV toolkit is going to be your best friend as you're working with your UV shells and your edges and your faces and your UVs and whatnot. And if you're looking for an overview of what all the tools in the UV toolkit do, then they have just that in the Maya documentation, and they have not only description of all the tools with links to further details about the tools, but they have helpful GIFs that help you accomplish all sorts of useful things with your UVs. So be sure to keep them in mind, or be sure to keep your documentation in mind as you're working your way through using the tools, especially for the first time. In any case, what I'm going to do with this shell now is I'm going to unfold it. I'm going to unfold it along in U, because that's my horizontal direction, and that's the way that it is functioned here. So unfold in U, and then you can see it gets it real stretched out in this case, but it's just getting it at the scale that it was and then unfolding it, and it spaces my edges so that they have the spacing that they would have here in my world space. And you can see now I have minimized my distortion quite well because I have nice even checkers going all the way around, except for this guy right here where he's a little bit longer in black because this edge right here is where my seam is. So ultimately what I'm going to end up doing is moving my seam behind this geometry, which I have that can help hide my seam pretty easily and conveniently in this case. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pardon me. Usually I like to have my UV editor over on a second monitor, but you know, for the sake of recording, I want you to be able to see it. Anyway, what I'm gonna do is, pardon me. Well, I know it's up here under modify, and then it's under normalize. And I want to normalize it in U and V. And what normalize does is it gets your UVs and it scales them to fit perfectly within this original 1x1 UV scale where you'll be eventually placing your texture, basically. So I'll hit apply and close. That wasn't quite what I wanted. It's not the result that I get when I pardon me. Just playing it here, basically here. Here we go. And then if I hit normalize here, for one reason or another, it scales it the way I want it to scale it. Now you see my UVs are much smaller, meaning that these lines are going to be much bigger, and it might seem as though I have distortion, but it's just I'm not capturing the entirety of the square anymore. My distortion is the same, so I know that I am in fact all good. And you know what, I think what I might do here is it can help to just get your UVs out of the way when you're first working with them, and then sort of assemble them into your 1x1 map later. In any case, what I want to have happen is I want to move this seam to be behind this edge over yonder. So what I'm going to do is get my neck and I'm hide it, and you know what, I might just hide everything but the body for now. And yeah, so I want to move that seam to my center line over yonder, which is right here. So what I'm going to do, which perhaps so you can see a bit better, is I'm going to get that edge right here, and I'm going to use my UV tools and go to cut and sew. I'm going to cut it, and now this is two separate shells, and I essentially just want to just keep an eye on both my seams. I want to just move this over so that I can get this edge, which is just this singular edge in world space, even though it now appears as two edges in my UV editor. So I want to match these up without distorting them. So I'm going to select both. I'm going to hit snap together. I have it set to B to A. And I'll bring it over to be perfectly snapped together. I'm going to select that edge, and I'm going to hit sew. And now my seam will be hidden behind my neck, And you can see this is all one singular shell again, indicated by the whole thing being highlighted at once. And let's move along, as it were. So next up, probably the easiest way for me to be able to now select the entire top face would be to separate this UV shell here from the rest of my object. So and get this edge and select it going all the way around in world space here, and now that I have that entire edge loop of my opening selected, if I go into here and I press cut, now if I go into UV shell selection, my entire top face here is its own separate shell that I can select and move around, which makes an easy selection of all of these top faces. But I'm going to want to reproject this. So I'm just going to do, since this is mainly flat, I'm going to do a planar projection. So I'm going to go and up to UV, and I'll open up my planar options. I'm going to project from Y because I want it to project top down. I'll hit apply. And you see I get a planar UV projection of this UV shell. And it basically, yeah, just took a straight top-down picture of my model and put it in there. However, this means that these faces going around, as well as these faces going around, are going to have stretching. You would see like streaks if I had like a color image put onto them. So I'm going to want to unfold this shell as well, which I'm just gonna hit and I'm just gonna hit straight up unfold and see what that affords me. And now these faces are in the proper, and these faces are unfolded, and you can see how my texture properly goes from one part to the other, which might end up looking a little wonky and distorted when I go to actually put my picture on them. But for now, I can just leave them as is with these shells functioning how they are. And now I will also select this UV shell and this UV shell, which is the entire other part of my guitar in there, and I will once again project, do a planar projection, UV planar from the top down. You can see I'm working with this here. I have the same issue, and I can also use this like paint unfold tool, but I'm just gonna hit regular unfold, and it's gonna repack my shells when I hit unfold. But we can always move these around later. And now, alright. Now let's keep on trucking. So basically this is going to be mainly a hard dark wood, and then same thing, it's going to be a dark wood as given by what we got going on here, which perhaps I actually do want to make this pardon me. Perhaps I do actually want to make this edge loop here its own UV shell, so I can give it the same light wood look as this up here, but for now I'll just leave it. I can always cut it later. And now I'm going to UV unwrap the inside, which I'll do a similar process for. And I don't have to worry too much about my seams this time, because they're going to be well, they're going to be pretty hidden here on the inside of my guitar. And I'll do UV cylindrical, same thing as before. I can hit the good old unfold along, and then I can hit the good old normalize down here, then normalized in my UV shell. And now we have UV shell selection. I'll do these guys and these guys, which you know what? Actually, what I'm gonna do for this, I'm gonna redo that process I just did, but include all of these in that whole process for my inner shell. And so once again, UV cylindrical, and then my toolkit, unfold along, normalize them, and we're cooking. And now UV shell, I'm going to grab this one and this one and do UV planar projection, and it should basically be about that. I mean, I can hit unfold if I feel it's necessary, but not necessarily. Regardless, we should be fairly well UV'd at this point. Next up, what we would basically want to do is start stacking our UV shells where they are stackable, and then and then it would, but yeah, now we want to arrange these all properly into our UV space in a way so that they can cover enough pixels and maintain the right amount of resolution. So I have just a test texture, so to speak, where I can I'm rendering an Arnold, so I might as well use an AI standard surface. Let's see what we got going on. Color, file, and let's load her up. And I believe it's this one. Yeah. Basically, I just got two different kinds of wood divided into two halves of an image. At the very least, at the moment, I can start sorting them by wood type, and we can start seeing what's happening here. Now, in order to get the most out of your textures, your UV shells are going to have to occupy as much of the UV space as possible without bleeding into other parts that you don't want them to. Now for this process, sometimes I like to just scatter my shells so I can work with them one at a time without them overlapping, and I can just place them all next to each other exactly how I want them to. But alright, so this one's the top, and I got some light wood, and what I can do is I can align it sideways like that, and then I can UV pardon me. Just a second. Alright. And we got, we want to start aligning things. And arrange them. So basically this is a pretty large part of my model, so I want to scale it up best I can, and I can orient this, which I could say orient to hit orient shell, and what that will do is it will try and make my edges all run relatively even to my grid lines in here. And I want this to be able to be as wide as possible, which looks like I can be about there. And there's that texture placed. And now let's get our side, which is this over here. Like that. Orient that shell. Let's scale this up quite a bit. And we're starting to get our different wood grains going along. And you can see that the wood grain looks perhaps larger than it is meant to say the least. But basically we could fix this by having higher res texture, or just like, so we could essentially like zoom out to have this have more pixel density in our image, which if I look at my properties here, I don't think this is an extraordinarily high res image. It's I have it as a 2K image, but regardless, this is a rather zoomed in swath of wood grain. We would want this texture to be more high frequency so that we can not have such a long grain stretched out along the length of my guitar. Regardless, I'm packing shells right now. Let's get back to packing shells. I did make this texture map as more of just a quick sort of a like garbage map test. And I wanted, in this case, to try and give my shell as much room to breathe without overlapping my other shell. Which, if you're using images and you want similar things to have the same texture as another part of your object, you can stack shells on top of each other to make the most out of your UV space. But if you want to potentially throw them into a texture painting program, your texture painting will be much more intuitive if your shells aren't overlapping. I see I have a bit of a tangle going on here. I can use my optimize tool, my little optimize paint here, which this isn't functioning at all. I thought it would, but I can optimize there. What is wrong here? Well, I can just select this and move it, and your optimize tool is for untangling your UVs, but I can just move these in such a way which it definitely looks like I would want to separate this strip here into its own UV shell, so I can have that be a different color to distinguish things. Looks like we have some rather wacky distortion going on here. We can always readjust things later. Anyway, some of these shells I can certainly stack. Like, there's no reason why this shell for the inside strip, which I can normalize in just the U direction so that it perfectly fills that entire U direction. And I can do the same thing here. Now it's perfectly touching that zone. But yeah, there's no reason why these can't sit on top of each other. Same thing in regards to this shell here. Which, if I want this to be a different type of wood, I could have like an image of a different type of wood over yonder, and I could take care of that. And now this is the inner bottom of this, which if I want to pretend as the same type of wood as up here, then I could also stack the inner bottom on here. Also, therefore, maximizing my UV space while stacking like shells upon one another. And that's about that when it comes down to it. I could match these up pretty well if I want. And there are even tools for matching UVs upon one another, but I have a feeling I may have just distorted my entire thing there. And there are also tools for stacking shells. Like, I can instead select both of these, and I could hit stack shells, and now it has stacked them. And I can do the same thing here if I want and hit stack shells, and it'll more perfectly stack them, so to speak. But regardless, that's about that. There's some fine tuning I can do to get rid of some distortion around certain edges and such, but generally that is the whole body UV'd, with certain parts looking better than others, but decent. You can see we got a weird swoop going on there that could get sorted out also, but I suppose so that I get these two light edges to work, that will be the last thing that I do here. Let me open this up real quick. I'm going to go edges, and then go to my UV. I'll hit cut, so I can get that as its own shell, and I'll place my seam over here, so I'll hit cut again, and then I'm gonna hit oh, I see, I'm still attached. Oh, I didn't cut it all the way around. This makes... You know what I'll do? I'll just redo it like this. Select all of that. UV, cylindrical, howdy doody, unfold along U, straighten that right out, and then let's go ahead and normalize those bad boys, and I can move that into a light zone, and I can scale it so it's not overlapping with these faces, and it's going to be awfully distorted with this particular UV map on it, but at least it has that proper lighter stripe that it should have. Okay. Regardless, we cruising, and I'll call that done for now.